Welcome to The Other Side of Medicine, a trusted source for education, not medication, for 35 years. In every episode of The Other Side of Medicine, we deliver health information your doctor won't tell you about. My guests are the nation's leading health experts in science-based natural medicine, physicians, authors, researchers, and clinicians. We believe natural medicine should be first, drugs and surgery last, and so we promise to deliver you the next generation of health information built on three principles: common sense, science, and cooperation with nature. Dr. Minich, she's a functional medicine practitioner. She's a scientist. She's a researcher. She's an internationally known speaker. She was working with one of my mentors, Dr. Jeffrey Bland, for over 10 years on a research team. She's written several books on nutrition and natural medicine. She has helped develop products for nutritional companies, and she has a clinical practice, and she actually formulated products. And we are so privileged to have you here with us this evening. Dr. Minich, welcome.
Wow. Well, thank you so much. Thank you for having me. And it's a delight to be here. And yes, I mean, gosh, we're all each other's teachers, right? You know, Dr. Bland, the whole community of functional medicine practitioners, I feel like we're ever learning and growing in that community, which is exciting. So great to be here with you for this discussion.
Yeah. I first got introduced to Dr. Bland probably over 35 years ago, and just really ever since been following his tutelage and his mentorship. He's an amazing gentleman, and he's the father of functional medicine is what he is.
Yes, he's brilliant mentally, and I would also say that emotionally he has a type of EQ as well. So I consider it an honor and a privilege to have worked with him for over a decade. I feel like I learned a lot on many levels.
Yeah, well, I'm sure you contributed to a lot of the things that he's accomplished over the years as well. So thank you for all the work you've done. So tonight we're talking about food is your best medicine. That's one of the mantras on our program here at The Other Side of Medicine. And we believe that most people don't have a clue about how valuable of a medicine food is. And so we're going to dive into that really deep tonight. And so I want to talk about the compounds that are in plants called phytochemicals. So could you give us the definition of phytochemicals from your perspective?
Sure. Usually in nutrition, we focus on macronutrients, which are protein, carbohydrate, and fat. They give us calories. Secondly, from that, there are micronutrients, vitamins, and minerals. Thirdly, from that are phytonutrients, which don't have calories, and they're not considered a vitamin nor a mineral. So there are thousands of these compounds, and there are so many different categories of them, like flavonoids, carotenoids, organosulfur compounds, nitrogen compounds. So they're all very distinct, but I would say that there are upwards of probably, it's hard to say because the estimates are, very rough, but probably like 25,000 different phytochemicals. Something on that order. And then, of course, our gut microbiome takes those phytochemicals and metabolizes them and creates other ones. So it just keeps going on and on.
Sure. What are the main source of phytochemicals or the phytonutrients?
So phyto refers to plant. Nutrient is that nutrient in plants. So again, this is not a vitamin or a mineral, not a calorie. It's found in plants. And so it can be anything that's plant-based, plant-derived. So that would be a vegetable, a fruit. It could be an herb, a spice. It could be in juice. It could be in tea. It could be in soup and broth. Anything that has any kind of remnant of plants in it could have certain phytochemicals. Now, one of the tips is that the most amount of phytochemicals that you're going to find typically are in the skin of any plant. And the reason why is because they act to protect the plant in harsh environments. So if we think of organically grown food, that's a good thing because that plant has to defend itself in the environment. And as a result, it starts to make more of those phytonutrient compounds, especially within its skin.
So would you say, it'd be a good analogy to say that the phytocompounds, the phytochemicals, would be analogous to our immune system. It would be kind of like the plant's immune system.
Oh, that's an interesting way to see it. I suppose we could say it's a little bit like that, but I think that they do a lot. Back in the 1990s, when we learned about phytochemicals, and by the way, phytonutrient and phytochemical, those are interchangeable terms. We're referring to the same thing. So back in the 1990s, many people and researchers thought of phytochemicals as antioxidants, meaning that you're just going to protect yourself from free radical stress. Now we know that these phytochemicals are doing a lot more. Not only do they have antioxidant properties, but they change gene expression, they change our epigenome. They are also signaling the gene in such a way to encourage the gene to produce proteins that are protective. So in that way, they're protective. They help with stress response. They help with inflammation. So now what we know about plants is much more than we knew about even 10 years ago. There is a lot that that plant is doing through its phytochemicals.
So, what happens when we're missing these vital compounds in plants? Because most Americans get very few fruits or vegetables, they get a scanty amount. And especially today, what's happening with so much misinformation on the internet, and people are getting confused thinking that they shouldn't eat carbohydrates, which a lot of the carbohydrates like grains and beans and legumes, people are starting to shy away from those things. And we're not getting enough of those. What happens when we're missing those things?
Well, we can miss the obvious fiber. You know, a lot of plant foods are sources of a variety of fibers, and we need those fibers for our gut microbiome. We need them for just a healthy gut overall. And plants in general are carriers of macronutrients and those vitamins and minerals. So they're not just giving us phytochemicals, they're giving us the composite of different nutrients that we need. So when we don't have these phytonutrients in the diet, we may be falling short. This is called a phytonutrient gap. In fact, back in 2009, there was a very interesting survey that went out, and it basically showed that 8 out of 10 Americans fell short when it came to getting some color in their diet. And out of all of the colors that were surveyed, the color that was in the least amount was blue-purple, like a violet color, right? Like blueberries, blackberries, figs, raisins, grapes, grape juice. So that color was in short supply. So, you know, the way I see it is that every color has its own functional signature. Red connects to the immune system and inflammation. Orange largely connects to antioxidant activity in the fat tissue and also reproductive health. Yellow, digestion. Green, the heart. And blue-purple, the brain. So if we miss one of these colors, we might be missing some function that they give. And let me just give a quick example of that, one that's very well recognized in science. It's that of lutein. Lutein is a carotenoid. It's yellow. It's like a yellow-green color. We find it in kale. We find it in parsley. We find it in basil. It's typically hiding underneath that chlorophyll. And what we know about lutein is that it embeds into the back of the eye called the macula. And if we don't have enough lutein in that place of our eye, we can start to lose our sense of frontal vision. So that would be referred to as age-related macular degeneration. So lutein is very specific for that. In the literature, there is an association between low levels of lutein and greater risk for age-related macular degeneration. So it's not causal. It doesn't mean if you don't have lutein, you're going to get macular degeneration. But for people who are more susceptible, they need to ensure that they're protecting and nourishing their macula with lutein. So the body is so smart. It knows where these compounds need to go. You know, lutein doesn't just go to the back of the eye. It's also found in the brain and has been correlated with measures of cognition, with brain health, right? So the body is smart, nature is smart. They come together through plants, and we get the benefit of those plants, especially organically grown food, which will have typically more of those phytonutrients.
Yeah, it's really interesting because there's the USDA says that, most of the vitamins are pretty much comparable whether you have conventionally grown or organic. But when it comes to minerals and the phytochemicals, the organic really outperforms dramatically with the conventional. So organic is much better in that respect.
Yes, it depends on the study. I've seen different results over time, and that can vary based on the food that is being tested and what they're looking at. But in general, if a plant has to defend itself in the environment, many times it will upregulate the machinery inside in order to make more of those phytochemicals to protect itself, to survive, to have better defenses. So again, we get the benefit of some of those when we eat those types of stressed foods.
So the plant is getting stressed out, and it makes this. The more the plant gets stressed out, the stronger the phytochemicals it make. Would that be
Yeah, that's a good way to say it. Although when I think of a poor plant being stressed out, it feels like, ooh, if I think of it being resilient and hardy and made strong in its environment, right? Because that's essentially what is happening. It doesn't have the layers and the coatings of pesticides, herbicides, and insecticides. So it's got to fend for itself. And it can do that by turning on its genetic machinery to make more of those plant compounds.
Mhm.
So that's more power to the plants. I do think that this planet, based on all of our environmental issues, we really need to be looking to plants. I think that plants are that mediator that will help us with our health long term.
Yeah, I really believe that everything in nature is always trying to balance. We're trying to find balance in our bodies, and the earth's trying to find balance, and they try to help us inside the plants. The plants get stronger when there's stress in their environment.
Yeah.
And when we eat those plants, our bodies are able to adapt to those toxins in the environment. And let's talk a little bit about that, because
Yeah.
we're so exposed to so much toxins today. How do the phytochemicals protect us from the toxins in our environment?
Well, one way is if we are changing up our diet overall, and we have a lot of diversity, we will bring in other nutrients. We'll have better nutritional status. So we can't stop the environmental toxins that are out there in our exposure. There's no locus of control that we have. But our locus of control is making sure that we are nutritionally sufficient and that we have the nutritional cofactors to play a role in the detoxification process to move those things out. Because one of the things that I learned from our friend Dr. Bland over the years is that metabolic detoxification requires nutrients. So if we have enough vitamin C, enough vitamin E, we have sufficient protein in the body, we have phytochemicals in their supply to act as part of this process, then we can quickly move toxins out of the body, depending on our genes. But essentially, at least we have the reserves to move them up and out of the body through their elimination channels. If we don't have those nutrients, it is more difficult for the body to remove those toxins. So one of the best things we can do to reduce our toxin load is to ensure that we have proper nutrition. And that's the one thing that we can control. We can't control what goes in the ocean. We can't control what goes in the air. We can't control what goes in the soil. None of those things it just causes a lot of stress. But what we can do to some extent is control what goes into our bodies through our everyday choices with food.
And that's a beautiful thing, because nature, again, has a provision for us. Even though that we're living in this toxic environment, nature has an answer if we are smart enough to take advantage of that. And so I think that's a real key point. What are some of the let me ask this before I go on, because a lot of people think that they go on maybe a week-long detox, that they're really doing themselves like an amazing amount of good to their body. And instead of trying to eat a plant-based diet and getting the advantage of that on a regular basis, giving them that kind of protection, would you think that would be a much better choice than trying to go on a 1 week cleanse?
Well, let me say this. After being in the clinic for a number of years and witnessing people doing elimination diets, essentially going through a detoxification program, and typically in the clinic, we would do them for 21 to 28 days. What we saw collectively, and I have data on this, is about 50 to 70% reduction in symptoms, which is really compelling. Those are symptoms all across the board. Things like emotional aspects like anxiety, better sleep, better skin, better gut health, more energy. Typically, what I would see, especially within that first 7 to 14 days, is a person would have more energy. So giving themselves that reboot was really important. Now, they could sustain that to some degree if they continued on to reintroduce foods, note those responses, create some kind of personalized program. But if they just detox to retox and then detox again, back and forth, maybe in some way that's stress on the body. I mean, or maybe it's creating resilience. But my preference is, of course, to do the best you can in your everyday situation. And I do think that going a little bit over the line from your everyday and trying to improve another facet at least twice a year through a more, I would say, like a codified detox program, like maybe a group one like I do, where we're eating the elimination diet, we bring in colors. The way that I do it is I have the elimination diet that we talk about in functional medicine, but then every 3 days we focus on a certain color of foods. And we bring in red foods for the first 3 days, then orange foods for the 4 days 4 through 6, in a variety of those different colors. So I think, again, people do the best that they can, but yes, ultimately it would be great if every day we were thinking about our water intake, our fiber intake, our plant food intake. Longer term, that'll be better for reducing our overall toxic burden.
Yeah, I just think that sometimes people get an idea that they're going to go on a cleanse and then go back to the way they're eating and they're going to get some kind of magical benefit. I think it's much wiser, as you're discussing this, that we should eat these types of foods on a regular basis. And so if we get into a zone where we're eating primarily a plant-based diet, you don't have to necessarily eat 100% plant-based. Some people choose to do that. But if you eat close to that, you're going to get a lot of protection and you're going to be detoxifying your body on a daily basis. That's what I was trying to say.
Yeah, yeah, I agree with you. Absolutely. And sometimes it's not what you bring in, it's what you leave out. So in functional medicine, we talk about avoiding, and then we talk about how you nourish the body. So if somebody says, well, it's too much for me to eat all those vegetables and, that's just changing my life too much. Well, okay, let's avoid certain things. And that could even be cooking methods. One of the things that creates more toxins in our food is dry, hot, heat methods of cooking. Now, my PhD was on essential fatty acids. So for 4 years, I studied a lot about fats. And I know that they break down in heat, light, and oxygen. So one of the things I don't like is for people to cook in a lot of oil. I think you damage the fat. Then you create these oxidative products that make the body go rancid and become inflamed. So I think it's good to use water. Not to say you shouldn't have oil in your food. I'm not in that school of thought either, but don't subject it to oil. Don't have poor cookware. Have good cookware, no Teflon. So we can make a food toxic just by how we cook it. So if somebody says, you know what, Deanna, I am not going to change what I'm eating, but I can change how. That to me is a good first step. Sometimes we need to take baby steps. We can't just dive into the ocean at the 10-foot part, right? We have to start at the 1 foot. We kind of walk into the pool, rather, maybe not the ocean. Let's just say the pool, because it's contained and it's our locus of control. So you start with small steps. And I think that cooking and how we cook, and even smelling, I think about all the restaurants and the chefs as an example, how they smell those fumes. Do you have good ventilation in your kitchen? Are you using spices in your foods? Because the spices will help to reduce the amount of things like heterocyclic amines and advanced glycation end products, a lot of these toxins that form with all that heat. Now, does that mean that you should be following a raw foods diet? No, not necessarily, because with raw food, depending on where you live, what you have access to, you may not get everything out of that food if it's in its raw state. I think you need something in between. I think you need a little bit of steaming, a little bit of heat to unlock those fibers and to make
Aren't some of
those.
the phytochemicals actually enhanced by heating them?
Yes, yes, they are. And those phytochemicals are the carotenoids, the fat soluble phytochemicals would be more prone to being unlocked from the plant matrix with heat. A little bit of heat and a little bit of fat too.
Well, you really opened up my eyes a little bit more because I have a tendency to saute things with the oil, and I'm going to change that after being inspired by you today on this talk. And so I appreciate that, and it makes a lot of sense.
Here's what you can do. Well, and just to clarify, you can steam it in water, but then add the oil once it's cooked, right? Okay, so yeah.
I understood that.
Okay.
Yep, that makes sense. And it doesn't change the profile of the taste. Actually, it probably will taste better that way as well. And I've done it both ways. So I'm going to lean towards adding the oil after I cook saute the vegetables or whatever I'm cooking. So thank you so much for that.
Sure.
Could you talk a little bit about the synergy between the phytochemicals and the microbiome in our gut?
Yes. The microbiome, all of those microorganisms like to chew up and metabolize, and basically they work on those different phytochemicals. They're creating all kinds of byproducts from them, whether it's short-chain fatty acids, changes in acidity or alkalinity within the gut. And you're changing not just the metabolites, but you're changing the overall environment of the gut. So one of those aspects, and I know Dr. Mark Hyman is talking a lot about this lately, is polyphenols. I'm sure your audience has heard about polyphenols. So under the phenolic category, these are phytochemicals. And under phenolics, you have the simple phenolic acids. Then you have the more complicated polyphenols, where you have many phenol groups together. The gut microbiome loves those. So as an example, pomegranate. Pomegranate is a great source of a lot of big polyphenols that give the gut a lot to chew up. Another one would be resveratrol. Other ones would be like epigallocatechin gallate. So in tea, you get a lot of these polyphenols, which again, the gut really likes those.
Yeah, Dr. Minich, I wrote a book on anthocyanidins back in 1998. And
you're ahead of the curve.
Yeah, I was a little bit ahead of the curve, and I was talking about the benefits of grapeseed and extract and pine bark extract and resveratrol back in the late 90s. And so I've been a little bit ahead of the curve for a long time. I was actually, one of my books that I wrote called Carbs from Heaven and Carbs from Hell. In that book, I pinpointed the blue zones. And I had actually maps of the blue zone regions in my book. And it was 6 years before National Geographic did their studies. So I'm a little bit ahead of the curve. And I'm not trying to like boast. That's not the reason I'm doing it. I'm just saying that people like yourself and myself, we are really pioneers in this field of trying to help people to really enhance their well-being by taking advantage of what nature has to offer.
Yes, and I'm so glad that you have been ahead of the curve and helping, because, Dr. Bland is like that. So many people, Adele Davis, even my mom. The only way that I got into nutrition is, so I just turned 52. So I grew up in the 1970s. And at that time, it wasn't cool to be into health in any way, shape, or form. In fact, it was the time of Wonder Bread, and my mother would make this Adele Davis recipe of brown bread with, and she didn't let us have jelly. We had to have either banana, sliced banana, or honey together with the peanut butter on this brown bread. And so it was different. Even when I went to Girl Scouts, I couldn't drink the Kool-Aid. I had to have my own cooler with my own food. So I didn't.
I love the saying that your mother shared with you. The whiter the bread, the sooner you're dead.
Yeah, well, I think that came from Adele Davis as well. That was one of her major inspirations was Adele Davis, who was a nutrition pioneer. My goodness, even
Yeah,
Jeff
I
Glynn's
actually,
mother followed Adele Davis and was aware of her, right? So she
sure,
inspired a lot of us.
sure. I actually heard that saying the first time when I was at one of the National Federation conventions. You might remember that group, but maybe not. They were of the forefront in this country of really leading the way for natural research and natural medicine and trying to educate people on a regular basis across the country. But anyways, I met this gentleman who was a Salvation Army officer, and he was 94 years old. And I was at this lecture hall, and I saw this white haired man doing a headstand on a desk in a lecture hall. And then they flipped off the desk. He did a flip. And I was like, I want some of that. And that was one of his sayings, the whiter the bread, the sooner you're dead. And I've used that my whole career. So that's kind of interesting that your mom said that too.
She said that, and by the time I was 9, she had me reading labels, and I knew what mono and diglycerides were. I knew, and it almost was a little too much, I got to say, because in all honesty, in my teen years, it was very difficult for me to be different from the other kids. You don't want to be different when you're a teenager.
Mm-hmm.
You don't want to have a different lunch. And I'm the sensitive oldest child, really trying to fit in, and it was kind of traumatic. And so I actually developed an eating disorder. I would go and binge. I would take I used to have a newspaper route. I'm getting very personal here with the audience, but I used to have a newspaper route. I'd take that money and I'd go and spend it on candy, and I would eat it outside of the house. And, often when I tell this story, I have moms asking me, like, oh my gosh, now you're making me think about how I do talk about food with my kids. Am I too obsessive? Is it too orthorexic? For me, it ended up into a good, I just talked with my mom today. I love my mom. She, if it wasn't for her and that stringency and that rigidity, I wouldn't have emerged in the way that I have with this path. And I give a lot of credit to her because, my dad is a junk food guy. He's just the opposite. So I have this dynamic tension between junk food dad and health mom, even to this day, and they're in their 70s. They're still like this. So I'm somewhere, I'm definitely much more like my mom, and she and I go back and forth. Like, she'll try to tell me about something. I'm like, but mom, no. And, she's still very in the know and does a lot of reading and is, she
good for her.
She's,
we need community, and whether it's
yes.
in family, or if it's in friends. I know I was inspired back when I first got introduced was because of a community of people that we used to meet at Hiram College. And there was a professor there who was just so inspirational, and he was really way ahead of his time as well. And he used to educate us once a week, but it was community that held all of us together to stay on track, because we were on uncharted ground and we were learning as we went, and it was really an exciting time. So I really appreciate the fact that you learned from your mom, but it inspired you to become who you are today, and thank God for that.
Well, and I love what you just said about community. You're so spot on. And that's why even now I have moved away from seeing clients one-on-one, and now I do groups, because I do believe that the group heals the group. When somebody in the group feels like they're falling behind, or, oh, I fell off the track, the whole group lifts everybody up. And I feel like that to me is very promising. So I do think that, yes, whenever we make a change in our food or in our lifestyle, it's really good to have support, because when I was seeing clients in the clinic, oftentimes they would have the patient bring their spouse, because I thought, if their spouse is not on board, this is not going to work. In some cases, I would go to the home and actually do a family visit where I'd sit in the kitchen. I remember one family in particular, we sat at the dining room table. I had everybody, even the kids, talk about their goals. What did they want to do with food in their lives? Where were they? Because they're not all on the same page. They're in different places. And then we looked in the refrigerator. We talked about the kitchen. We talked about certain foods. So I do think community is huge whenever we want to make a change with our food, and to keep it in that sustained manner, we need community. I love that you brought up that point.
Yeah, it's really nice because I've actually moved in that direction myself, going from one to the many. Because the internet, we can develop a tribe of people who will continually help to support each other. And I believe that that is, again, what we're talking about here right now. And I think you can influence so many more people, but the group, as it moves along, helps to support each other and be able to move forward and be able to stick to a program. Because we're all just walking and wounded as we go along the way, and we can support each other. So I think it's really wonderful.
Yes.
And I think you're going to learn as your tribe grows, and I'm sure you're going to have a big one, and probably already do, that you're going to be able to influence people in a much more profound way. So thank you for doing that as well.
Yeah, you're so spot on. And, even the science would show us that whoever your tribe is, who your community is, you become like your community. And we know that from the blue zones. And it's kind of intuitive, right? You're the sum of
Exactly.
the 5 friends you have or so, right? You are who your friends are. And
Yeah.
so for many people, they struggle, especially when they want to eat better, but then they don't have the support. It's almost like, in addition to having a new diet or new dietary pattern, you have to have a new community that is supportive of that. Then you'll
That's
go much
one of the,
further.
you brought up about the blue zone. That is one of the key elements, as you
Yeah,
know. And so I think we can learn from the blue zone people. I've actually had the privilege of visiting some of the blue zones. We just came back from Costa Rica
yeah,
about 2 years ago. We went there, and it's quite an extraordinary experience. But they're losing that whole mindset, that whole lifestyle there. It's unfortunate that around the world, that kind of community uh, gathering and influencing and helping each other out is being lost because of our new way of life with the internet and with such a quick
mm,
way of life. And that's sad.
yeah, yeah. Well, and I was just in the Mediterranean in 2022. I was there with my husband and some friends, and the Mediterranean is a very interesting area. And I do think, I don't think they eat as well as we think that they eat. But one thing is that there's a lot of movement. It's not just food alone that can heal us, it's everything. It's our thoughts, it's our community, it's our sleep, it's our ability to be in nature and to be balanced in that. And the people in the Mediterranean, one of the things that I found is that lots of movement, lots of swimming, uh, more fresh food. It may still be bread and cheese and meats, in some vegetables like olives and pomegranate. Pomegranate was big. In fact, we were in Cyprus, and Cyprus is close to Turkey and it's close to Greece. And they would have pomegranate. They had this one pomegranate juice stand that I just absolutely loved, just to have that fresh. My mouth is watering just even thinking of it. Having that fresh pomegranate was so incredible.
Well, you mentioned Greece and the people of Icaria, which is one of the blue zones. We were talking earlier about diversity. They found that they were eating around 200 different plants or more on a weekly basis. So, could you
Yeah.
talk more about the benefits of getting that kind of variety of plants and diversity in our diet?
So my 3 principles for eating are color, which we've already talked about, creativity, which we can get into, and then the third one, best for last almost, is diversity. And I would say we need variety in all things. Many times what happens with food is people get into food ruts, especially people with health issues, where they come to you, they're on very defined, rigid diets, then they get a lot of fear. And so they don't have a lot of diversity. They stick to like the 7 to 10 things that they can have, and then they eat the same things over and over. And then you get other people where every single day of their lives they've had oatmeal for breakfast, like no deviation. They don't want to think about it. Food is just energy. Well, what we now know from the literature on dietary diversity is that diversity of our food is correlated with better gut microbiome health. So overall, our gut is fortified through those diverse compounds coming in. So instead of monoculture, we get polyculture. And further, we get better immune health associations. There are so many other associations. I mean, even with kids, one of the things that I hear from parents is, Deanna, I can't get my kids to eat the rainbow. And there is this one study in particular in which they gave kids three, I think it was three different vegetables versus one. And what they found was that the kids ate more vegetables when they had variety, when they had the three to select and choose those versus just having the one. Like if they had green beans versus green beans, peas, carrots, whatever. The human brain goes for variety, which is also why the all-you-can-eat buffets can also not be so good. When you see all that variety, it's kind of like, ooh, wow. You just want to take part in that. But overall, what we want to aim for, and I know that probably in Icaria and other areas like the blue zones, they can get to 200. But in some of the studies that we have, at least like the American Gut Project, 30 to 50 unique plant foods in 7 days. Now, let me just describe that a second because people may not know, like, well, what is unique? So that means that instead of going to the store and buying a bag of Red Delicious apples, to self-select and buy a Red Delicious, Pink Lady, maybe Granny Smith. Don't buy just one bag full of the same kind of variety so that you get the same nutrients, same phytochemicals for the most part. Vary it up. I live in Washington State, so we have a lot of apples here. So we actually do have a lot of variety available to us. So what I would say is you can have an apple on one day and then an apple on the next day, and then that counts as two. But if you had that same apple, Red Delicious on one day, Red Delicious on day two, it only counts as one. So you want variety. And so one of the things I did in one of my groups was I challenged everybody, and maybe, you've done this in your groups too, where I say, let's see how many unique foods you can get, plant foods. How many can you get in a week? And I had everybody track them. It wasn't about the amount. It was only about, just a little bit would still count. I had one woman from Australia that had over 200 unique plant foods. I think I had about 121.
I've done exercise with my groups that I have as well, and I actually had about 160
nice
plant foods. So I was
very good.
Really surprised. Yeah. So, but you're saying that it's better to, and I like your way of, instead of buying a whole bag of apples of one variety, buying several different varieties. I love that.
Correct. And then, you self-select, you can see which one is like not bruised. And, sometimes when you buy a bag of apples, it may be a little bit cheaper, but they're not all equal apples. Many of them are just, on their way out, not as fresh. And I love the idea of just hand selecting your apples. Or even, for some people who say, Deanna, I don't have the time to sit there and pick out all my apples. Okay, so when it comes to greens, there are many types of bags of greens now where you have blends. You have baby kale together with, instead of just buying like spinach, like a bundle of spinach, to try to get something where you can get a mixture of those greens.
Mm-hmm. So could you talk a little bit about phytochemicals and some of the research that's being done now with, helping to change mood and behavior? Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, that's pretty exciting because, I think most people realize that if you eat more fruits and vegetables, that you're going to reduce your risk for a number of chronic diseases. And we hear a lot of organizations talking about that, right? Reduce your risk for cancers, certain kinds of cancer, reduce your risk for type 2 diabetes, reduce your risk for dementia, all of those things, good science, we hands down can't refute that. But what we're seeing is that by having more colors, so here's my slogan or my mantra: colorful foods equals colorful moods. So what that means is the more colors we have, and the science is really robust when it comes to looking at fruits, vegetables, plant foods, supporting mental health. So reducing depressive symptoms, being associated with less anxiety. And here's the fun part. There are even like 2 or 3 different studies in which they look at how when people eat fruits and vegetables, they have greater associations with more curiosity, more creativity, greater sense of well-being, and even less psychological distress or stress. So I think it's beautiful to see how, and especially those blue-purple foods. Like I did a whole webinar once just on blue-purple foods in the brain, and it was on mood as well as cognition. There's good science, and you would know this because of your work on proanthocyanidins, of how much a lot of those pigments do travel to certain parts of the brain that are responsible for learning and memory and even mood. So yes, most people want to be healthy, but they want to be healthy so they can be happy. And if we would know that fruits and vegetables, these plant foods, help us not just to be healthy and reduce our risk for diseases, but also confer better mood states, which kind of makes sense too.
Sure.
Right?
Could you talk a little bit about, some people think they can just go to the health food store, pick up a supplement that has some of these phytochemicals in them, that they've concentrated them into a pill form, and they're going to get this amazing benefit. Could you talk about how the concept of the whole is greater than the sum of the parts when we're looking at these phytochemicals?
I absolutely believe that and know that to be true. I mean, who could do better than nature? Nature has everything in the right variety in that food to prevent potentially toxicity, to have nothing that's in too great amounts, too low amounts, and the right blend. Whenever I see a supplement, it's not that supplements don't have their place, but what we miss in a supplement would be the complexity of what you have in food. I mean, just think of it, thousands of compounds in food versus maybe 3 select isolated compounds in a supplement. And do we really know how the body does with, thousands of milligrams of that particular compound versus maybe a handful of milligrams in a food, right? So there could be a different dynamic. Now, one of the places that we've seen that take off is with turmeric, right? So turmeric root. Now, here's where there may be a case for using turmeric compounds in a supplemental way to have some kind of therapeutic benefit or effect. And typically that's done under the auspice of a clinician or somebody who's guiding that process, right, to help people make the better selection with a product. But yeah, with turmeric root, you get a lot of different things that you won't get with a curcuminoid supplement. But the curcuminoids can also be good.
For the benefit of our audience, it might be a good idea if you're going to use a supplement like that, like turmeric, to use the supplement, but also use the whole plant as a food as well.
I like that. Or even to have the extract embedded into the whole plant matrix, right? So that you do have something that resembles the signature of the plant compounds.
Mm-hmm. So I really want to talk a little bit about how we're getting a lot of misinformation today, and a lot of these people who are trying to sell books or supplements are telling us that there are some anti-nutrients that are in plants, like, for example, oxalic acid or the lectins or some other plant compounds. What is your response to those people who say, stay away from those plants, stay away from the beans and the legumes and the plants that have the lectins in it? What is your response?
Well, Weston Petrosky, one of my graduate students from a couple of years back, and I wrote a review paper, and we published it in a scientific journal because I really wanted to know, because every time I would lecture on plants, that was exactly the pushback I would get. Well, what about these anti-nutrients? So just for the audience to understand, so there are select isolated compounds that have been identified that may block the activity or the absorption of certain nutrients. So for example, tea, tannins in tea, which are essentially polyphenols, have been known to block iron from being absorbed. So if you have tea close to a meal containing iron, you may reduce some of that iron absorption. Now, depending on who you are, that may be a good thing. That may not be a good thing. There can also be a workaround. You can have that same cup of tea 1 hour after having your iron-rich meal. Let's just say you're iron deficient and you're maybe iron deficient anemic. So tannins are listed as an anti-nutrient because they are known to block the absorption of certain minerals like iron. So what we found in this paper, you already named some of them: lectins, oxalates, goitrogens, which typically we found in the cruciferous vegetable family. Some people
phytoestrogens.
I was just going to say, phytoestrogens are on that. We almost put histamines into the paper because there's such a buzz about histamines as well in plant foods like strawberries or spinach. So here's the thing. Here's what Weston and I came to as a result of looking into the science, because I was concerned. I tell people of the benefits of plants, and I wanted to know, are there some dangers and risks? And I do think that if we are eating plants out of their traditional context. So let me give a context on that. So if we are drinking raw juice of certain plants, large amounts over and over again without diversity, and out of the context of how that plant has been eaten, we may see some changes. Absolutely. I don't discount that. Let's just take oxalates as an example.
Yeah, back in the day, by the way, it reminds me, back in the day, I used to take beets and I used to juice beets, and I would drink 16 ounces of beet juice until I got educated and learned about that wasn't such a good idea because of the oxalic acid.
Well, especially, in the beet greens too, and also just a lot of sugar. But I would say,
I would take the whole greens and I put everything in there, the whole green.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah. I got it now.
The whole plant. I was all about whole foods. I didn't
Gotcha. Well, and there are ways to reduce levels of those compounds in our foods. Like heat will often inactivate some of those specific compounds, especially steaming, fermenting, autoclaving. When we let legumes soak overnight and then we rinse them, we're getting rid of a lot of these compounds, then we cook them. So there are ways to bring levels of them down. But don't forget that we also have many other compounds in that plant that will oftentimes offset the effects of any potential anti-nutrient. Now with oxalates,
they've actually done research with lectins, and they found that there are some properties. They have anti-cancer properties.
Yes, you definitely, we put that in the article. There is some cell work, so some preliminary in vitro work to suggest that they may have immune modulatory effects. With some plant compounds, it's almost like, if you think back in the day of beta carotene, if you take a lot of beta carotene in a smoker's body, it can actually work as a pro-oxidant. So many times an anti-nutrient, what we would call an anti-nutrient, might be reflecting something about the milieu or the environment of the body. Is it truly lectins, or is it that the lectins in the food are signaling an immune dysregulation in the gut? Something to consider. Is it really oxalates, or are the oxalates signaling that we have mineral imbalance, like we don't have calcium, we don't have magnesium in the right proportions?
That's very interesting. I never really heard that before. That's really interesting.
Well, plants are smart. I don't know if you've ever heard of that. I think it's an NPR podcast that's called Smarty Plants. Plants are smart, and maybe plants are actually signaling a message about where there's imbalance or dysfunction. Now, all that said, let me also say that there can be outright things that are toxic in plants. There can be certain alkaloids in plants that can be not so good. So it's not that everything in plants is seen to be safe. We just have to look again at the whole of the plant, how it's prepared, the person that's eating it, how much, what are they eating it for, under what circumstance, time of day. There are a lot of different factors. Eating is a complicated venture if you start to whittle it down.
Sure. Dr. Minich, I really want to respect your time, and you've been so gracious to really come on board tonight after all this mess that started off tonight. But there is a couple questions I'd like to ask in closing, if I may, if it's okay.
Sure. Hmm.
Well, okay, number one is, what is your favorite food that has the most phytochemicals that you really think that we should really be eating? If you had
Cocoa.
one food to say.
Well, the first thing that came to my mind, you're asking my favorite food. I gotta say, cocoa. Cocoa in its raw cacao, cocoa powder form is filled with flavonoids. A lot of flavonoids. Berries are also top of the list, but actually cocoa surpasses berries. So,
Okay.
and I don't think many people would have a problem with that.
No,
Now,
I don't think so. But as long as they don't have the sugar, no sugar with it.
no
Just get,
sugar and good
you
quality
could put
cocoa, right?
stevia. They could add another plant, stevia. What do you think about stevia?
Well, stevia is a plant. I think it's okay, but when we start to granulate it and make it into fine molecules, or liquid tinctures where, a lot of those stevia products actually have other things in them, like maltodextrin, which is a starch, which is kind of sweet, right? So I think stevia in the plant-based form, like if you can have it as a plant in your kitchen and add a little bit to your foods, I think that's good.
How about
Monk
monk fruit?
fruit.
How
Monk
about
fruit, I
monk?
think, is also, so there's a spectrum for me. And I would say fruit, first and foremost, like a raw banana, a date. My mom would always say that when I was growing up. Mom, I want something sweet. Go have a date, and then have a date with like nuts so that you
Hey,
don't
did
have
your
that
did your
huge.
mom did your mom ever give you a hot date? One time I told my sister, I said, she was like 16 years old at the time. I said, "Would you like a hot date?" She said, "Oh yes, I really do. Who is it?" So I went. I said, "Just hold on, wait right here." So I went into the kitchen. I got a date. I put some cayenne pepper on it. I brought it back up and brought it back.
Oh, wow.
We had a big frown on her face after that. But to this day, we laugh about it. But yeah, so
That
dates
was
are great.
clever. Dates
Yeah.
are
So
great. But yeah, I mean, the less refined something is, I think the better it is.
oh yeah. Well, the last question is, what would you say the one thing that you believe is the most important thing to do in our lifestyle to stay healthy?
Diversity.
Diversity.
Diversity. Change it
Okay.
up. And you know why? Um, you have neuronal plasticity, increased heart rate variability, and better metabolic flexibility, like different people that you talk with, different experiences that you experience that cause you to think differently, different foods that fortify your gut microbiome. On this planet, we do well when we embrace diversity. I think that that's it. If you were just
I
to
love it.
corner
I
me and
love
say,
that.
what is it? It's
I love it.
diversity.
I love it. I love it. I love it. I think that's one of the most profound answers I've heard in diversity in life in general. I just
Life.
absolutely love it. And thank you so much again, Dr. Minich. I hope to have you back in the future when we can really
Sure.
have you shine as you should from the beginning to the end. You really picked up the ball and were able to make this podcast a wonderful time for our audience. So thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Krystosik. So nice to be here with you and excellent questions. We'll be
I
in
look
touch.
forward to having you back. And in 2023, I hope that you just have a blessed, healthy, and happy new year.
Thank you so much. You too.
Ciao for now.
Bye-bye.